I'm Gary Medley, and my father was Tom Medley, the originator of Stroker McGurk and the second Hot Rod Magazine employee on February 1948. And after he passed away 3 years ago, and he always wanted to do a book, and so I kind of felt like it was my mission to fulfill his wish, and here it is. 240 pages of everything, not everything he did, but for the chronicles of 7 decades as an artist. He wasn't the most organized man in the world, but he had more stuff than anybody I could imagine. And so we had organized some stuff in some plastic tubs, some of the original artwork, things that we knew where they were right away. And then he decided, he was 93 years old, and it was apparent that living alone wasn't the best situation for him, so he decided that he was going to move up with me to Oregon. But the event that really spun the whole project around was when he had this garage fire in 2011 that destroyed his garage, his 40 Ford coupe, and almost everything in the garage. But fortunately or miraculously, it was almost like my mother from heaven was aiming the flames around. There were a handful of boxes way in the corner that were shielded by toolboxes that managed to survive, although they did get wet and they got very, very hot. And in digging through the rubble when we found these, it was like, oh my goodness. And it turned into this weird triage project where notebooks that were wet had to be dried, prints that were wet or rolled up had to be like dried out and flattened. And it was a crazy project. And that sort of triggered this reevaluation of everything he had done and how important it was. And then the organization began more in earnest, and then he decided to move. And I found more original artboards and more strange artifacts, scrapbooks from World War II artwork, and then in the middle of the move, he actually fell ill and passed away 2 days after the escrow closed on this new house in Oregon. And the morning he passed away, we came back and we found this box that had all these letters that he had written to my mom, and he illustrated the envelopes. You'll see them in the book. And then when I got to Oregon and kind of made sense of everything and got settled, I knew I had to do the book. And then it became, well, not 2 years, but a lot of time scanning everything, photographing artboards, a lot of hours and hours in Photoshop, cleaning things up and putting it into chapters and how to organize all this stuff. And eventually it came to work. I ended up working with Dave Featherstone here, who kind of like encouraged me to self-publish. He did a lot of work on the production side, but the design of the book was done by a gentleman named Todd Gunther, who's a designer in Hood River, Oregon, that works with Nike and Adidas. And he also had met my father several years before, and he had come up and taken my father fly fishing in his 90s, and they got to know each other very well. So he had a kind of a vested personal interest in my father. And he's a kind of a very precise, dedicated to high quality. So he sort of pushed the envelope on the level of quality of the book, the design, and it went back through various iterations. And it turned out the way I always thought it would turn out, or wanted it to turn out. I think my father would be proud, and even Todd's is. It's a really cool book. And he's a hard guy to please. So. As the first chapter goes like this kind of life history, you know, he grew up in Salem, Oregon, and was a hotshot high school basketball player, but he was always in the cars. And went to California to play basketball in Fullerton and kind of got into roadster. He was always a car person. And then the war started, and then he went to the military in World War II. Did a lot of drawings for the 78th Infantry Division, and then met my mom during the war. Then after the war, they came back and they lived in Oregon for 1 year. But he always wanted to go to LA Art Center, and so he applied because he had all this stuff in the war for his portfolio. And they accepted him, and down he went, packed up his 36 Roadster and blew down to California, and stayed there and enrolled in school, and eventually my mom followed him. And he went to school, but he was also got more involved with the lakes racing scene and hung out at Blair's Speed Shop, and he was still doing like goofy cartoons, and he'd post them on the bulletin board at Blair's Speed Shop. And then one day this guy named Robert Peterson comes in, who's got this idea to do this car magazine called Hot Rod, and he goes, who's this doing these cartoons? And it was my father, and then he hired him to be the humor editor, and he started on the second issue. But the book goes from that period, which is 1948, all the way to basically when he passed away. The last cartoon in the book is his last Stroker McGurk cartoon was on a packing box of things he was coming to Oregon. So, and I also, in doing the book, I learned more about him, because I knew a lot about him, but I didn't know the extent, especially of his contribution in Hot Rod. Early issues, if you flip through like the first year of Hot Rod, it's like, then he shot the cover and he did the cutaway and he did the letters to the editor illustration. There's a Stroke and McGurk cartoon, and it was nuts. It was crazy. I don't know how the man ever slept. Maybe he didn't. Okay, you can buy the book online on my website, which is strokerbymedley.com. He's so well beloved in the industry, it wasn't really a hard sell. But you know, like Hot Rod just done things, Rodder's Journal has an upcoming thing. Sales are pretty good. We it's a limited edition, so we printed like 1,000 of them, and way more than half are already accounted for. And the book really hasn't even. This is the first event that anybody's actually held one in their hand. Yeah, it was a labor of love, and it turned out the way I envisioned it, and that doesn't happen very often.